Okay, there we are. I'm assuming that everybody can see the text. Is that correct? You can see the text? Yeah? All right. Good. Okay, we started this last week. We did not finish it. So today's class may be a little bit shorter than a normal class, but it doesn't matter. We do have to finish this idea that we started off last week. We're talking about, as this whole chapter talks about, the entire chapter is talking about the 10 Sefirot Hagnuzot, the 10 hidden Sefirot, or what we call over here in translation anyway, the 10 Sefirot of nothingness. The 10 Sefirot Hagnuzot. These are the 10 Sefirot that are actually concealed in the light before the light is in the vessels. Now, this is a concept that's explained. I've explained it in many previous classes, and in classes on the Sefer Yetzirah as well. And the idea, let me just see, there's a chat question here. Okay, good. Okay, so the basic idea is as follows. There are actually two opinions in Kabbalistic literature. The one opinion, which is the earlier view, which is the view of Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. Rabbi Moshe Cordovero lived in the 1500s, the earlier part of the 1500s, and he was a master Kabbalist who wrote the work called the Pardes, or the Pardes Rimonim, which is a classic and a sort of an encyclopedia of all the teachings, all the major teachings of Kabbalah up until his time. He was regarded as a consummate Kabbalistic master, and he had one view, and then Arizal has another view. The Arizal was the one who followed him. I'll explain that in a minute. So, according to the Ramak, according to Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, the idea was that the Sefirot, all of the Sefirot, all of the divine emanations, were primarily the vessels of the emanations, and the light within the vessels was all the same light. Only what? The vessels changed the light. And he gives an analogy, and he explains that if you would imagine that each vessel had a different color, so the water in that particular vessel, it's all the same water from the same river, from the same flow, the water in a red vessel is going to look red, and a blue vessel is going to look blue, and a yellow vessel is going to look yellow, and so on and so forth. All the vessels have a particular color. In other words, they have a particular, what's called in Hebrew, a hagbola, a limitation. That limitation is the particular sfira that it represents. The concept of chesed is giving, kindness, outflow, outpour, whereas the concept of gevura is withdrawal or withholding. So chesed would be represented by the color white generally, whereas gevura would be represented by the color red, because red has that idea of withholding more. Anyway, he goes on to explain it and so on and so forth. But that's not the only opinion. There's the opinion of the Arizal. The Arizal was actually the person who became the successor to the Ramak. He knew the Ramak for a very, very short while, and he was the only one at the Ramak Rabbi Moshe Cordovero's funeral that saw this pillar of fire following the bier, the coffin of Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, this pillar of fire that was above his coffin, and he remarked on it, and everybody understood from that the torch had been passed on to the Arizal. But the Arizal was a very innovative person, extremely innovative mind, an absolute genius in many aspects of Torah, and particularly in Kabbalah. And he, in fact, passed away before he was 40. And the voluminous writings that we have were all the teachings that he gave over to his students. He himself wrote very little, as was often the case, but his students recorded, particularly Rabbi Chaim Vital, recorded his teachings. So Arizal has a different approach. He says that there's certain aspects of the light which are also limited. In other words, it's not all one color water that gets affected by the vessel that it's in. There are different gradients, different gradations in the light itself, in the light that fills the vessels. And therefore, the light of chesed is not generally going to go into the vessel of gvura. The light of gvura is not going to go into the vessel of chesed. As one can understand, only the light of chesed goes into chesed, the light of gvura goes into gvura, and so on and so forth with all of the Sefirot. There is, however, he points out, certain circumstances where you get what's called achlifu duchtaihu, a phrase in the Zohar that means they change their place. Sometimes you get the light of chesed in the kli, in the vessel of gvura. I'll give you an example of when that kind of thing happens. When, let's say, a parent wants to instill a sense of propriety or a sense of, how shall I call it, a sense of awe in his child, his or her child. So he might, even though the intention of the parent is chesed, and that's why the kli is chesed, nevertheless, the light of it is gvura. In other words, or it could be vice versa. And that example is an example of the opposite way around. The vessel is the vessel of gvura, and the light is the light of chesed. The parent's intention is for the good of their child, but the way that they do it is by being somewhat strict with the child in order that the child will learn some discipline, some self-discipline, some discipline towards respecting his elders, his or her elders, discipline in respecting values, and so on and so forth. So the intention is chesed, the intention is the light of chesed, but the vessel is a vessel of gvura, because the parent instills somewhat of a sense of respect, or perhaps you can even call it fear, but don't use fear in the wrong sense. Americans are very afraid of the word fear. We shouldn't use it in the wrong sense. So the Arizal explained, therefore, that the 10 Sefirot HaGnuzot, the Sefirot that we're talking about, are called 10 Sefirot because they are divided up into 10 different qualities. Even the light is divided into 10 qualities, not the vessels, not just the vessels, but the light themselves. But now he's going to, or the Sefer Yetzirah is going to explain what happens in their source when they are not separated yet into the various colors, or we could call them, or the various particular identities of the Sefirot. And that's what it begins to talk about now, like a flame in a burning coal. Now, this translation here is actually an incorrect translation. I have to take exception to what Rabbi Kaplan, usually Rabbi Kaplan is very, very accurate, but over here, he translated this incorrectly. It says over here, the original says, Kashalhevet kshura b'gachelet, like a flame bound to a coal. So it's explained, therefore, that there are actually two aspects of the flame and the coal. There's the flame that's bound to the coal. That's the flame that's revealed. That's the flame that's only bound to the coal, but is outside of the coal. In other words, the flame that you see on top of the coal. And then there's the flame inside the coal, which is a different level. It's a much higher level of fire than the flame outside of the coal. Okay, so this is actually what we're going to be discussing right now. We're going to be discussing this idea of the flame that is bound to the coal and the flame that is within the coal. Two different explanations, two different approaches. So, first of all, we're going to discuss how the flame within the coal is not yet a definable existence. Why? Because it's inside the coal. You don't see it. It's inside the, and of course, this is only an analogy. This is an analogy for the light before it becomes manifested in the vessels. When it becomes manifested in the vessels, that light then becomes visible through the vessels. But when it's before the vessels, when it's still in the category of light itself, then it's called a flame that is within the coal. Okay. In other words, it's a flame that cannot be subdivided by its effects because it hasn't yet done anything. It's still within the original coal. It's not something separate from the coal. It's part of the coal. That is according to one explanation. The second explanation is when we say that it's kshur b'kachelet, that doesn't mean the flame inside the coal, means the flame on top of the coal. And there's various commentaries that explain that way. The Ravid and the Ramak and so on and so forth. The Ravid, Avram ben David, and the Ramak, Moshe Cordovero, explain that we're talking here about the flame that is bound to the coal. In other words, the revealed flame. Okay? But they agree definitely that the revealed flame is a result of the hidden flame. In other words, the revealed light that there is in the Sefirot is a result of the hidden light that is before the Sefirot. So everyone agrees that that must be the case. In other words, you could say that there are two types of light. There's the light before it comes manifested, and then there's the light as it became manifested. Two different things. The much higher one is the light before it becomes manifested. That contains within it everything that will come out later on in various explanations of where exactly we are talking about, which is the singular light before it becomes manifested. So there's various opinions, like exactly where this is. Is it the lights of the world that is called Akudim, which is the lights before the world of Atzilus. In the world of Atzilus, they're already manifested in vessels. But the lights before they're manifested in vessels is called the light of Akudim. And those are called Sefirot B'Kli Echad. There's 10 lights within one vessel. In other words, within the coal, within the vessel are not manifested yet as 10 separate lights. But in any event, however we explain it, everybody agrees that the greater unity with the coal, the greater unity with the underlying substance, if you want to put it that way, is the flame within the coal. It's a greater level of higher level of unity. Why? Because it hasn't yet become revealed in various different levels and different disparate types and subdivisions and so on and so forth. And therefore it has no existence on its own. It is simply divine revelation. In the analog, this is all the flame within the coal is just an analogy. It's talking about divine revelation, whether the revelation has become manifested yet, or whether it's still in a state of oneness. And that's actually what he goes on to say, that this, what the various commentaries, Hasidic commentaries, go on to say, that this idea of the singular light before it becomes subdivided, that is the Gilui, the revelation of the Or Ein Sof, the revelation of the infinite light before it becomes subdivided into various categories. Nevertheless, everybody still agrees that the revealed lights are also connected to the light inside the fire inside the coal. Just as the fire outside of the coal would not be there if there was no fire inside the coal, so too the lights that are manifested in the Sefirot are connected to the original light before it actually becomes manifested on a lower level. Now, this therefore is what he wants to bring out of this analogy. The analogy is for the master is one, right? The master is singular, and the way he translates the master is singular. In other words, all of these explanations ultimately stem from the original source, the one master. When we're talking about the one master, we're talking about God, right? In other words, the presence, the divine presence, the presence of God. Now, when we say presence, the word presence in Kabbalah has a particular meaning, and perhaps it's not the right word to use here, but let's call it the existence, the divine existence. So the divine existence that's singular. Very important idea, and one that needs to be presented in the right light to be able to understand it. As we know, in Christianity, for example, the idea has been divided into three different capacities, three different ideas. I'm not an expert on Christian theology, but we know that it's divided into three different ideas. Judaism rejects that completely. So does Islam, actually. But Judaism certainly rejects that completely before Islam. There is only one divine being. There's no other manifestation. And that's what he says. For the master is singular. There's one master, and he has no second. There's no concept of second. There's no concept of anything else outside of the divine presence, the divine existence. And actually, this is a very fundamental teaching, particularly in the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, although it's an idea which is expressed much, much earlier than the time of the Baal Shem Tov, but the Baal Shem Tov explained it much more clearly. Baal Shem Tov and the philosophy of Chassidut explained it, Hasidism explained it much more clearly, that there is nothing else. Ein od. Not only is there nothing else besides it, there's nothing else. That's it. Everything is a divine manifestation. Now, you might start asking the questions, if everything is divine manifestation, does that mean everything is divine? That's a long discussion, and we need to go into it. It does not mean that everything is divine. It simply means that you cannot divide the divine existence into subcategories. That's all there is godliness. And therefore, everything that exists is to a certain extent, it's a figment of our imaginations. In other words, it's there, yes, it's there because of the tzimtzum, it's there because of the various activities that were produced, that divinity, that God produced in order to create the world. But the creation ultimately, even though from one aspect it's a reality, and there's various planes of reality, the five worlds, the world of Anan Kadmon, the world of Atzilut, the world of Bria, the world of Yetzirah, and the world of Asiya. There's 5 planes of existence, descending planes of existence. Nevertheless, these planes of existence, when all is said and done, all return to the oneness. They're all part of the same oneness. In other words, it's that oneness that is not limited to being infinite. That oneness can also be expressed in finitude. And that's why it, so to speak, was necessary, in quotes, to create a finite world. Why God wanted to create a finite world, to show that even the finite world is part of infinity. Even the finite world in which we live is not limited by its finitude. It becomes part of the, and this is a very long discussion, and there's a work that actually discusses it, and it's very well worth reading. It's called Derech Mitzvosecha, the way of your mitzvot, the way of your commandments, by a Hasidic Rebbe named the Tzemach Tzedek, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Lubavitch, third Lubavitcher Rebbe. And in this book, Derech Mitzvosecha, he has this essay called Ha-Monos Elokus, Belief in God, and he discusses all these ideas there. Very well worth reading. It's available in English. I might even have a link to it. In fact, I think I do have a link to it. Just one second, folks. Let me see if I can find. No, I don't have the link here, but I do have a link, and I can, anyone is interested, I can send it to you. Well worth reading. It's well translated, somewhat explained, not explained at length, but connecting phrases and explanation of brief explanations of things that you need to know. And therefore, it discusses this whole idea. It's about 12 chapters long, so I'm not going to go into it now, but nevertheless, it's an important idea. Now, we haven't finished yet, and just let me see if there's a couple of questions here. like an owner of a corporation is sitting there, his son work way up the ladder to gain insight to the management of the business. Yeah, that would be an example of chesed, the light of chesed, and the vessel of Gvura. Yes, a very good example. Yes. Is a flame within the coal. Yes, that is correct. The line from Atzilut downwards is revealed, and beyond Atzilut is not revealed. In Akudim, there's only oneness in terms of the vessel. It's a single vessel, but nevertheless, there are 10 lights. Eso Eres B'Kli Echad. That's the way it's explained it. That's the way it's expressed in the writings of the Arizal. Is the undivided light one is blue part of the flame? No, because the blue part of the flame is only on top of the coal. The part of the flame is bound to the coal. No, the blue part of the flame is already the differentiated light. It might not be revealed completely, but it is nevertheless. It's like the secrets of the Torah and the Torah. The secrets of the Torah are somewhat hidden, but nevertheless they're already revealed somewhat. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue now with the next sentence, and this is a critical one. Before one, what do you count? Now, there's been various mathematicians. There was a mathematician named Cantor, as far as I know, that he was one of the mathematicians in modern times to discuss this whole concept of zero, like what the meaning of zero is. Zero actually a number? Is it part of the number line, or does it not really exist? Before one, what could you count? And they trying to trace like the origin of this whole concept of zero. Where did it come from? Because originally people did not count zero as one of the numbers or in the number system at all. It didn't make any sense. Things start with one. You can't count before one. What can you count, right? As it says over here, before one, what do you count? But the as you see here, they come to some kind of conclusion that the first one to talk about it was a 5th century Arabic mathematician who talked about the number zero. It's not true. You can see this already in the Sefer Yetzirah. And again, the Sefer Yetzirah comes from Abraham, and it was written down in the 1st century, 2nd century. It was written down by Rabbi Akiva because they're afraid that all the texts were going to be lost. So they started writing things down because of the destruction of the Second Temple. Roman times, after particularly brutal era of Roman rule of the Middle East, they decided to write all these things down, even though the oral Torah is meant to only be taught orally. In any event, so you see here, right in the Sefer Yetzirah, before one, what do you count? It's hinting to the concept of zero. What is zero? What, just not mathematically, but conceptually, what is the idea of zero? The idea of zero is something that's not yet manifested. It's something that can be everything, and it's something that's nothing, right? Or it's a nothing that's something. How do you exactly define it? So there's a whole meditation and a whole discussion in Kabbalistic terminology, exactly what the concept of zero is. So the way people normally understand zero, that it's the absence of everything. It's not yet one, it's not minus one, it's not whatever, it's nothing, right? Kabbalah says it's exactly the opposite. That zero, that concept of zero is the everything, right? Out of which the 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 emerge. So that zero represents the everything. It represents the entire divine being, if you want to put it like that, which cannot be delineated and limited, and therefore you can't call it one, you can't call it two, or whatever it is. You can only call it zero, nothingness. That whole concept of before one, what can you count? In other words, God is one, but there's really a concept of one, could be a number as well. The oneness means, in our context, means the unique aspect of divine existence that's indivisible and contains everything. The word that's usually used for it in Kabbalistic translations is the word plenum, P-L-E-N-U-M. It's the plenum, it's the inclusion of everything, right? So zero, therefore, the before the one is not echad, as the word for one in Hebrew is echad, but here we're talking about what is called yachid. Yachid means the one and only, right? The only. In other words, divine presence, divinity, the existence of God. And that is the second lesson in 1.7 of Sefer Yetzirah. 1.7b. Okay, any questions, folks? I see there are a couple of questions. Rabbi Cordovero speaks about zero as well. Yes, it was already after zero had become understood somewhat in in mathematics in any event. Not only does it have potential, but it has infinite potential. It is the infinite potential, not it has potential. It is the infinite potential of everything. That's what zero represents, the infinite potential of everything. The before one, what you count, represents the infinite potential of everything. That is the idea. All right. Any other questions, folks? No? Okay, good. There is, I'm planning on a class tomorrow night, but certain circumstances might intervene. So I'll have to see if it's going to be a realistic possibility, but I will send out an email probably closer to the time. So watch out for an email around 7 o'clock. And I hope there will be a class tomorrow night. And we are going to discuss some interesting Kabbalistic concepts to do with Isaac and with Isaac, Abraham and Isaac primarily, and we will see and Isaac and Jacob and so on. We will see tomorrow night what it's all about. But I will let you know again at about 7 p.m. my time. In other words, an hour before the class is supposed to start. Okay. Night, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. All the best. Good night. Okay, welcome.